Senior producer Pete Bennett there reporting on this week's Buried News. Today, the President of India, Pranab Mukherjee, steps down from the role he's held since 2012. One MP who has just begun his role in the British Parliament is Tamerjit Singh Dhesi, and he's calling for an inquiry into a British-backed atrocity at the Golden Temple in Amritsar, India, or at least it's alleged. He is the first turbaned Sikh in any European Parliament, and he used his maiden speech to smash through what he called a glass ceiling in British politics. Thank you so much, Dan, for coming on the show. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Afshin.
Your maiden speech got a lot of coverage. You said that your constituency has one of the highest rates of homelessness, malnutrition in the country. How do you think that squares with Theresa May saying we've never had more people in work?
Slough is a very vibrant, very diverse place. It's just west of London, so close to Heathrow. It is a major business hub with several corporate and startup headquarters there. However, as you rightly pointed out, it is juxtaposed next to issues about malnutrition, about childhood
in the 21st century.
Yes, and that's it's something that, as you said, it doesn't quite square up with Theresa May and her statements, and that's why there are so many people that are having to go to food banks in order to ensure that they actually feed their children. That they lead adequate lives. So I don't think that the Conservative government are dealing with the just about managing.
Some might argue that your party, or certainly people who didn't vote for you, or maybe for any party at the general election, would have said that your party is the one synonymous with privatisation, PFI hospitals, PFI schools, cozying up with the rich in the City of London, and let alone the killing, wounding or displacing of tens of millions of people because of the Iraq War.
Afshin, I wouldn't fully agree with that presentation. In terms of privatisation, our party is not a proponent of privatisation. If anything, it is Labour that is actually fighting off the continued backdoor privatisation of the NHS or of our public services.
Maybe now, but historically, under Blair and Brown, it wasn't.
If we look at under the last Labour government, millions and billions were invested into the public services to ensure that we had the shortest waiting lists ever on our NHS and so forth.
But you brought in private contractors into hospitals. You had PFI contracts that are costing the taxpayer, always bringing private capital into the NHS.
It wasn't meant as it is being used today in terms of a wholesale privatisation, bit by bit, where huge contracts, multi-million-pound contracts, are going to huge private medical healthcare companies. Who, by the way, Afshin, many of whom just happen to be large Tory party donors.
But if one believes that, as some say, that Blair and Brown were heirs to Thatcher, just tell me about this independent inquiry you're calling for over, sounds like a mad conspiracy, I have to say, Thatcher, maybe the SAS, and something called Operation Bluestar.
That's right. So for many of the RT viewers, they may not be aware that in 1984, there was an attack on the Golden Temple in Amritsar in the Punjab state in India. We were never aware of any involvement of the British government or any advisory capacity, etc. It was only after the 30-year rule when documents became apparent, and there was a lot of good work done by journalists such as Phil Miller, and a lot of good work done by the Labour MP Tom Watson and others to actually bring this out into the wider domain. And since then, Sikh organisations, and British Sikhs in particular, have been demanding an independent inquiry to establish the extent of the then Thatcher government's involvement in that attack in Amritsar. So the likes of myself have also been calling for it, and I was very, very pleased that Jeremy Corbyn, Tom Watson and the Labour Party actually included that within the manifesto, within the Labour Party manifesto in the 2017 election. We were very happy with that, but juxtaposed next to that, Afshin, is the fact that the Conservatives, whether it was under the Cameron government, whether it's under the current Theresa May government, they are simply brushing it under the carpet because they don't want us to uncover the extent of that by having full disclosure on the issue.
Well, I mean, that's your allegation. Angelina Jolie's great friend, the former UK Foreign Secretary William Hague, is on the record for saying that UK assistance for the attack or massacre at the Golden Temple in Amritsar was just in a purely advisory
Oh,
role?
absolutely. If it was in a purely advisory capacity, then why don't we have full disclosure? That will establish the extent of that, because there are thousands of people, victims, who would like to know the truth. There are millions of Sikhs around the world.
Is it thousands? Because the initial death number was 575, I understand. Then Hague said 3,000 caught in the crossfire.
What actually happened in the Golden Temple attack, and pursuant to that as well, there were thousands killed in Amritsar on that occasion. But if you look at the pogroms, and the genocide thereafter, which, by the way, the genocide is not my word. Even the Indian Home Minister has used the fact that it was a genocide, and we need, but that's a separate issue altogether. And that's something, what I am concentrating on is to try to get an independent inquiry, as the Labour Party has demanded as well, that the government needs to come clean. The only way that we can deliver justice, to the affected, and also to the millions of Sikhs and the hundreds of thousands of Sikhs within Britain, who I think are very much in support of that demand.
Genocide is quite a big word when it comes to UK broadcast regulators. Anyone who disagrees, welcome to send in an email to
As
this.
I said, actually, that was the word used by the Indian Home Minister as well. So
Of a later government. You said in your maiden speech that you took this job with humility. You were proud to be elected to the British Parliament. What did it feel like to be in a parliament where the government is in power because it gave £1 billion to one section of the country? Proud to be in that parliament?
Actually, I am very, very proud to be in the British Parliament, which is the most diverse parliament ever, wherein more women, more ethnic minorities, more LGBT, and more people with disabilities have been elected than ever before. But as you very rightly pointed out, if £1 billion can be found from the magic money tree to help out the good people of Northern Ireland, that is not fair either on the people of Slough or people in other parts of the UK, where this austerity, these cuts, are having a devastating impact on local communities. And that is why food bank usage, not just in Slough, but in other parts of the country, has increased from a mere 41,000 during the Labour government to now it is more than 1 million people are dependent on food banks. And having volunteered in food banks, I know just how important a role that they're playing in today's modern Britain. And that is why, if funds can be found for Northern Ireland, then I'm sure that when Slough is faced with more than £54 million worth of cuts to its own council, its own public services, and more than £12 million cuts to our schools, then we need some of that money as well. Thank you very much.
But of course, you know that the government says we have to pay off the losses of the bankers in the City of London. That's why your Slough and other places have to rely on food banks.
Actually, I would strongly condemn such statements, because the austerity is ideologically driven. It is not a necessity. That is Tory ideology coming to the fore. So, for the last 7 years, we were told by now that the deficit would be eliminated, the debt would be coming down, etc., etc. The government has failed on its very own parameters. The parameters that were set up in order to be an economically very well managed government, and it's failed on that. So that is why I think it needs a Labour government to bring hope and prosperity for everybody, that's shared for everybody. And that's why our mantra during the election was for the many and not just the few.
Tamarjeet Singh Dhesi, thank you. And that's it for the show. We're back on Wednesday when we go to the A Rock and a Hard Place exhibition in London to speak to the artists and activists damning the privatisation of publicly owned land and buildings in the UK. Till then, keep in touch via social media. We'll see you on Wednesday, 64 years to the day of the beginning of the Cuban Revolution, the failed Guantanamo barracks attack led by Fidel and Raul Castro and Che Guevara against a US-backed dictatorship on the island.